Thank you all for coming along today. My name is Richard Elder. I'm the Associate Director for the Thomas S. Foley Institute of Public Service and Public Policy at Washington State University. And I want to thank you all for being here today. And I especially want to extend my thanks to our institutional partners. The Civic education program here has been terrific. And obviously I see a lot of interns here in the program. It's great to see you here too. And I'd also like to thank the Secretary of State's office. We've been coming here now since 2010 with a small break for COVID. And it's been a real highlight in our programming to be able to work with the office, with secretaries of state. And Steve, you are now the third Secretary of State that we've worked with. It's been an absolute pleasure, so thank you very much. You can see the title of the talk today, and there's the question about counting on the youth vote. What counting there? Because obviously this is, we're thinking about elections, so counting votes, but it's also about whether you can count on someone to vote, right? So a little pun there. And it's related to the fact that there's a claim that younger citizens are simply just not engaged or not involved enough to actually vote. And for me, this was a real issue. I teach at WSU, I've got a high school in the house, my stepkids are at high school and all kinds. They and their friends and all the students I teach at WSU seem to be incredibly passionate and care deeply about some of the biggest issues of the day, whether it's the environment or inequality or the housing crisis, the judicial system, social inequalities, very much so. So it seemed odd to me that why are they not voting? That was the question, right? And so we are very lucky today that we have an excellent panel who are going to talk about this. In fact, this issue. I have to put on my glasses because with old age comes the inability to read introductions very easily. So there we go. So kicking off the event today will be our esteemed Secretary of State, Steve Hobbs, provide a few remarks before handing it over to Erin Hayes on the extreme left there, on your right, who is Deputy Director of the Democracy Policy Initiative at the Goldman School of Public Policy at the University of California, Berkeley. She'll be talking about some of the data behind and some theories about youth turnout. We'll then hear from Steve Vuleta, who is the Civic Engagement Program Manager in the Office of Secretary of State, about some of the strategies that have been put in place to encourage youth turnout, especially among underserved communities. Finally, we'll hear from Kendall, Hodson, who is the Chief of Staff at the King County Elections Office, so we can find out what's actually being implemented on the ground. Each person will be speaking for about 10 minutes or so then we should have time for Q&A afterwards. We'll be finishing fairly promptly, I think, at 12:45. So with that, I'll hand over to our Secretary of State. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. All right. So we have Senate interns in the House, right? Raise your hand if you're in the Senate. How about the House? Raise your hand if you're in the House. All right. Raise your hand if your member is on the Ways and Means or Appropriation Committee. Please raise your hand. Great. Guess what? So my budget is in jeopardy. I need $15 billion. And the other thing is, I don't know, can you hear me? It's good? Great. So here's the deal. It's very important. Steve's going to say some amazing things to you. You're going to be like, Steve's a great guy. He should stay in his job forever. Well, he can't stay in his job if I don't get the $15 million, so you got to do that. I heard, rumor is, I'm a politician, so I don't lie, is that you get an A for the entire year if you can get that money for me. So cash that in after we get the budget. So, by the way, I am so thrilled to be here today. It's part of the Foley Institute, part of the WSU program. We got some cougs in the house. Do we have some cougs in the house here? Oh, very quiet. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm a husky. I'm really... Thank you very much. By the way, fun fact, Tom Foley was a husky. Take that, WSU. I do want to say something, though. It's very important. What you're doing right now, you got to take advantage of it. Okay? Get to know the people on your left and right. Get to know your fellow interns. Hang out with them at night. Some of you are laughing like, oh, my God. Because it'll matter in the future. Because some of these interns, some of you might be a legislator someday. Way back, there's Brian Hatfield. Brian, could you raise your hand? So he's my legislative director. He's a coug, right? I do hire cougs, right? I believe in that. And he was a legislator. Brianna Thomas, who is in the House, was my intern. And there are several instances where we have legislators who become interns, which means the interns were not paying attention because this legislative job doesn't pay a lot of money. And you get stressed out. So anyway, we are here to talk about, the youth vote, how important it is. And we got a great set of panelists here to talk about that. And look, we have been debating about how do we get youth to be out, to vote, to stay engaged since I was your age, and I remember younger during MTV's Rock the Vote, right? And guess what? It doesn't really work. It kind of just stays flat. Or it goes up a little bit, but mostly stays down. So maybe we can come up with some great ideas here. Maybe these panelists can say why, and maybe we can find a way to really make your vote count, okay? So with that, Erin, you're up.
All right. All right. Thanks everyone for being here today. It's a great turnout. Let's see, as Steve mentioned and Richard mentioned, I'm from UC Berkeley. I'm going to talk a little bit about some trends in youth voting over time first. We'll move into some theories about what the research says about why youth turnout tends to be lower than other age groups. And then we'll move into a discussion about what's happening in Washington State. So just to get started, we'll look historically. So in this figure, the bottom red line there, it shows registration rates for all 18 and 19-year-olds across time. As you can see, it is significantly lower than other age groups. And this is a problem because you can't go out and vote unless you're registered. So one of the big problems with lower youth turnout is that we just have low registration rates. Next is just turnout during presidential election years. And again, this black line is for 18 to 24-year-olds. So over time, we have much lower levels of turnout. I mean, even at its peak, which was in 2020 or the late 1960s, early 70s, youth turnout was hovering around 50%, right? So this is of all eligible voters, 18 to 24-year-olds, we're still only getting about 50% turnout. And this holds true in midterm elections. Again, we saw much higher turnout rates in the 2018 midterms, which was great, but over time, that age group of 18 to 24 is much lower than these other groups. And I also want to mention that there's some inequalities in who decides to turn out to vote among younger people, especially by education level, by race, by income level, and even nowadays by geography. So those in urban areas are more likely to turn out than those in rural areas. All right, so why is this? There are three different ways of thinking. They're called like age, period, or cohort effects. And to cover this first one, age effects, a lot of researchers just say, well, young people aren't turning out to vote because voting for the first time at 18 actually comes at a really awkward time. Young people are moving away from home often, they're starting college, or they're starting their first job, and it's just like a really bad time to, when young people are going through all these transitions, to figure out the logistics of voting, figure out how to register, especially because young people are also moving a lot more often than older age groups. And then, there's this term that there's these institutional barriers to voting that result in a high cost. So it's just, young people have to take more time off of work. Maybe there's more of a process to figure out how to register, to figure out where their local polling booth is, or if they're getting a mail-in ballot, there's like a process of experiencing that for the first time that can hold a lot of young people up from voting. And then older people, have just been around longer, and the age effects theory posits that, they have more skin in the game, too, at an older age. They're more likely to maybe own a home, have families, maybe get married. You're more integrated into the social system in a way where public policies really start impacting your life. So that's age effects. Period effects is more so just, big events that are happening. So in the 1960s, we saw a big peak in youth turnout during the civil rights movement. In 2008, there was a huge youth turnout during Obama's election. And then in 2020, there was a lot going on in the social ecosystem between the pandemic, the Black Lives Matters movement, and then the economic crisis we were all facing, and especially with high levels of youth unemployment. I think a lot was at stake for young voters in 2020. Then this last theory is known as cohort effects. This is actually an area where I tend to focus more of my research and focus, but it's the idea that generations are a group of people that have experienced similar events together. And, just to read this out loud, it's a specific set of social, economic, technological, or political circumstances that are, experienced at a formative period in young people's lives. So, like, when you think of millennials or even Gen Z, we're all coming of age at a time, during the, 2001 terrorist attacks, the 2008 Obama election, followed by the financial crisis, followed by the COVID pandemic, and that these events are really impacting not just individuals coming of age, but collectively a whole generation. So when I look at millennials and Gen Zs today, they're the most diverse generation that we've had. They're the most educated. And they're much more progressive on the whole than older generations. And I've taken a look at young people's values, and they tend to be much more egalitarian on the whole. And that means they're much more likely to believe in equality for all, or shared ideas around universal health care, or supporting abortion rights, or believing in climate change. And this holds across ideological lines. So even young conservatives are reporting some of the same shared values and some of the same shared support for these policy ideas. And then when you look to the 2024 election, there was lower turnout than during the 2020 election. So overall, only about 42% of 18 to 29-year-olds turned out to vote. As I mentioned, in 2020, it was about 50%. And also, there was a lower proportion of young people who cast all ballots. It was only 14% of the total voting population. I will say that state election laws play a role in youth turnout. So there's a research center at Tufts that looks a lot at this, and they find that states that make it easier to register to vote had higher turnout rates. States with mail-in ballots also tended to have higher youth turnout rates, and then states with more voter suppression laws, restrictive voter ID laws, difficult registration laws, they had lower youth turnout. And then moving on to Washington State, Washington State typically has higher turnout overall than the national average, and that especially goes for the youth turnout. A few things have really helped in the last few years. Washington State passed these new programs, the Future Voter Program, making it possible for 16 and 17-year-olds to register to vote online or by ballot. There's a new Temperance and Good Citizenship Day, where social science teachers have time during the school day so that they can allow their seniors to register and vote. There's the Motor Voter Registration Program, where when you go to get your driver's license at the DMV, you can register to vote there. And then just more recently, there's a new law passed saying that 17-year-olds can vote in primary elections if they turn 18 by the time of the general election. So that's pretty cool. And you see it in the numbers. In this figure here, this is data from the Secretary of State's office, and this is among all registered voters. So 18 to 24-year-olds return their ballot at around 66% rate in Washington State during 2024. So that's definitely better than the national average, but you can still see this inequality in age, right? Like the green bar gets bigger, the older the age group is. So older people are still returning their ballots at a much higher rate. So these other panelists will be able to share more about why that might be, or efforts to improve that. But before I pass it off, some major issues that were important to young voters during the 2024 election. The most prevalent reason young people gave was the cost of living crisis and inflation and the state of the economy. So, that to me just signals that, maybe a lot of young people weren't voting because they were kind of disillusioned with the two-party options and what people maybe were offering for solutions. On the other hand, maybe they were attracted to one candidate or the other because of what they were offering. Oh, shoot. Sorry. I touched a button. Okay. And then lastly, I just want to make the point, in this figure, this shows the electorate composition by generation. So in the bottom two dark portions of each of these bars is Gen Z and millennials. And as you can see, by 2028, these younger generations are going to make up half of the electorate. This is a really big deal. Because if you can imagine, we all get out to vote, we can have major influence on what happens, right? The views and policy preferences of younger people will be reflected not only in the policies get made, but in who gets elected. Young people can really express, what kind of future we want to have collectively if we turn out to vote. So with that, I will pass it off and we can talk about some of the efforts going on here in Washington.
So, hey everyone, I'll go ahead and stand up actually. My name is Steve Vuleta. As Secretary Hobbs said, I'm the Civic Engagement Program Manager for the Office of the Secretary of State in Washington. And a lot of folks kind of come to me and ask me, what is civic engagement? And I'd say, if you're in a legislative intern program, you're civically engaged. Has anybody here ever been on student council or government? Raise your hand. Have any of you ever been your representative or senator? Raise your hand. Have any of you done some sort of boys state, girls state, page program, any of those? Looking at me this time, but my point is all of those are forms of civic engagement. A lot of what the Secretary of State's office does is centered around elections and voting, and that is kind of the center mass of what a lot of the Secretary of State's office does. And Stuart Holmes, sitting right in front of me here, raise your hand, Stuart, wave. He's our Director of Elections, and he is the old hand at doing all of this and manages everything elections related in the state of Washington. What my program does is try to get all Washingtonians activated to be engaged in as many ways as possible. Hopefully funneling them into voting if they're not already registered and voting, but also through these other methods, through being involved in their community, being involved in the city council, running for student government, joining these nonprofit organizations, community organizing, attending a rally for an initiative or even putting an initiative on the ballot. You're all pretty educated in this stuff, so you probably know that you can actually get an initiative on the ballot if you get enough signatures on it. You can get an initiative for legislators if you get enough signatures on it based on the number of voters in the last gubernatorial election. So these are all ways for you to be engaged. In addition to that, we believe every single Washingtonian should be civically engaged and has a right to civic engagement. And we have 3 specific lines of effort dedicated to reaching what we call underrepresented and historically marginalized communities. So I have 3 civil rights specialists who actually work under me. One is David Lund. He handles our criminal justice outreach. That's for people who are currently incarcerated or those who have been incarcerated and trying to help those who are still incarcerated. David Lund himself, he's a bit of a unicorn. The guy is crackerjack smart. He has a lot of professional experience working with prisoners' rights nonprofits, and he himself was actually formerly incarcerated at one point. He has a lot of street credit when he goes in and talks about what he has experienced, what he's done, and he says, hey, look at me. If you don't believe that where you are can end up where I am, I'm living proof that not only can you be a good functioning member of society after you've kind of made a few mistakes, but you can also be a very successful member of society. I have Michael Bowman. He's a PhD, taught at Evergreen for a while. He does rural civic outreach. Rural populations of Washington don't feel heard. If you go out to Stoughton County, if you go out to Ferry County, you're going to find folks who don't feel like Olympia is responsive to them. And our job is to close that gap and make sure that you are being heard, your voice does matter, and that you are a stakeholder in our democracy and our state government. And then we have a third line of effort, Communities of Color Outreach. Brady Spencer is my Communities of Color specialist. And she was actually just hired in December, and she's already made contact with about 40 different organizations specializing in outreach to mostly youth, but communities of color in general. She's talked with the NAACP, local chapter, Tacoma Urban League, Black Youth Collective, Lakewood Education Collective, El Centro de la Raza, a number of organizations out there that are specifically targeting folks who don't necessarily feel like their voice is being heard either. And our job is to make sure that their voice is in fact heard. I do have to give a big shout out regarding Mark the Ballot over here. Does anyone know who Mark the Ballot is? You've seen this probably around. So Allie Zabel, sitting right here next to Stuart, she's our Information Security and Response Director. And Information Response was also stood up alongside my team by Secretary Hobbs because we wanted to ensure that the right information gets out to the right people and that we fight disinformation that gets out via various channels. Allie's Information Response team, they came up with Mark as a public awareness campaign to spread awareness around the state and to increase trust in the electoral process, to increase awareness about what we do to make sure the process has the utmost 100% integrity. We want to make sure people understand how the voter roll is maintained, how ballots are processed, how they're counted, how recounts work, how audits work, and that way there's no daylight between, well, what happens after I mail this in and the USPS just takes it off and it goes off, I don't know anything about it. Well, we have a whole system set up now, courtesy of Secretary Hobbs, Stuart, and Kylie, to ensure that people understand exactly what's going on. Mark's going to be around for a while. We have some swag, so please grab your Mark pins if you don't have one. He's a huge part of our outreach effort to folks. And a lot of the things they've been doing community engagement, hyper-focused local engagements. They partner with the Seattle Seahawks. They've gone to Mount Rainier, Rainier Beach High School, and done an event with them, other local sports teams. They've done a lot of really good things. So they're kind of looking at things from a statewide perspective. Then my team goes out and makes sure that every single group that feels marginalized is actually hearing that message and that they're getting engaged one way or another. The few initiatives we've done with that is not only partnering with organizations, but there's really kind of three standard order effects to reaching youth that I found, and of course with the Secretary's priorities to get folks in your segment of youth more engaged. And that is the organizations themselves, who we talk to these folks, and then we find out, okay, what do you feel is not being done? What do you feel is not being heard? And we meet them where they're at. The last thing Steve Vuleta is going to come up to you and do is, hey, I'm Steve, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. Not only is that condescending, it's also really creepy, so we don't do that. Well, the point of that is that y'all are smart folks. These folks are just like you. They're really intelligent. They tend to be really engaged when you talk to these organizations. And they generally know 95% of the solution. We're just helping them connect the last 5% of those dots. So the first thing is reaching out to those folks and ensuring that they're engaged as fully as they can. Maybe they don't know everything about the Future Voter Program. Well, Stuart and Miriam, our Voter Information Services managers, they send out some folks to get 16 and 17-year-olds enrolled in that. Because that means when they turn 18 or when they're eligible to vote, they can vote. So that's kind of the first order effect of that. The second order effect is they're now influencers. Everyone knows about influencers here. I'm talking to a relatively young segment. You are all influencers for your peer group. You're going to go out and you're going to talk to your folks about what you did when you were on legislative intern, what you learned from Secretary Hobbs and from everybody on this panel today. You're going to learn about, tell them what you learned working with your respective legislator or senator. And you're going to get them excited about this stuff. These folks in these organizations, generally, the youth, they're just as engaged as you are. And in some cases, some of those folks are in this room right now, I know. And so you're going out there and you're talking to them. So that's the second order effect. The first order effect is reaching you folks where they're at. The second order effect is having you folks talk to other people in your circle about how to get engaged civically. The third order effect is linking you all together. I'll give you a good example. I'm a veteran. My father was a veteran. I come from a family of veterans. I went to Boise State, which is an American Legion-sponsored program that basically it simulates government for 1 week over at Central Washington University. I think it's in Stanwood now, but way back 30 years ago when I did it, it was over at Central. Girls State with the American Legion Auxiliary does the same thing for young women. And they're rising high school seniors, and they basically set up a state government. They divide you into two political parties. You have no platform, so you get to make up your own political platform. So that leads to a lot of interesting conversations. But the point is, it gets you engaged. You get to see how things work. I actually ran for Secretary of State at Boise State. I lost. But I'm here now, so I consider that overall a success because that funneled me into my current career. What Brittany found, she's actually a Girls State alum. She's our community of color specialist. But she'll go to a Title I high school and talk to them. And they'll be like, we don't know about this program. And I'll be like, okay, let me make a note of that. Let me talk to Tony, who's the American Legion commander for Boise State. Also the Secretary is the American Legion commander, if I am not mistaken. But I'll be like, hey, Tony, do you know these folks don't know about this? They're like, well, tell them about it because we want more people involved in this. People just aren't hearing the message necessarily. Like I said, 95% of the information is there. But Title I schools, they might get overlooked for whatever reason. Sometimes the counselors don't know about it, sometimes they know about it and don't necessarily recognize it. Hey, no harm, no foul. That's our job to make sure that they understand that these programs are available. So that third order effect is linking the organizations together. And whether that's the American Legion with Boys State, the Auxiliary with Girls State, we talked to other organizations like the Washington Bus. I know VIS, our Voter Information Services Report, has done work with them in the past. But linking all these organizations together is crucial as well. So that's the three ways we try to engage everybody to get everyone in that 18 to 38-year-old demographic engaged fully in our democracy. Because my favorite saying is, democracy is a team sport. The Constitution will probably only wins when all players are on the field. There's no bench warmers here. So happy to be here. Happy to take any questions you have. And that's my 2 cents on civic engagement. Thanks.
Am I up? Is it my turn?
You are.
I'm gonna sit because I'm not used to wearing real shoes. So that's the plan. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. I had to lower this a lot. I'm very short. It's so nice to be here. As we mentioned earlier, I'm Kendall Hodson. I'm the Chief of Staff for King County Elections. But what I also wrote down to make sure to tell you is that I was also a legislative intern about 20, maybe 20 plus years ago. So it's always a little bit nostalgic to come back here. I worked for a member after doing the intern program, and then my career went a variety of different ways, but that kind of very much shaped my interest in being in government. And I've run into other interns in many different roles throughout my career. It's always exciting to be like, oh, when were you, down in Olympia being an intern? So really excited to see all of you today. Just really quick, King County elections. We run elections for about a third of the voters in Washington State. So many of you hopefully get a ballot from us. We've got about 75 full-time employees, so we employ quite a few folks. I think people are surprised by that. And then, this past presidential election, we hired almost 800 temporary workers. So in groups like this, I also like to mention that if you were ever trying to figure out where your career was going and looking for part-time work, we love hiring younger folks to come work just for even a couple weeks at a time. So something to maybe be a little bit aware of. Okay, I think what I'm supposed to talk about is what this is looking like on the ground. We were talking about this before the panel, and I always get a little uncomfortable in events like this, talking to a room full of young voters about what works to reach young voters, because you all probably know much better than election administrators what works, but I'm gonna do my best. As Secretary Hobbs mentioned earlier, this is something that we struggle with all the time, and for years we've struggled and tried really different things. It has looked like, ad hoc workshops with social studies teachers from the Seattle School District. It's looked like working with student government on kind of Temperance and Good Citizenship Day presentations. But just in the past couple of years, I feel like my outreach and engagement team has really done some incredible work that I'm excited about. So I'm going to mainly talk about that today. The place they started was really recognizing that we are not in education, we're not educators, we don't know how to do that. We know elections. So the first thing we did was to actually bring in some high school social studies teachers on contract and help them figure out with us what's going to work and how to navigate school districts. We also felt really strongly that content is going to be much more effective if it's actually developed by young voters and presented by young voters. So the other big piece is bringing in our civic internship folks. So they are the ones often who are out and about in classrooms doing that work in our high schools. And the third thing that was really important was not just showing up and giving slides, right? Like I've done that. I've gone to Circle K at UW. I've gone to lots of places and thrown up my slides and talked through them all. And I think there's a prevailing sense that doesn't work, especially in high school classrooms. So they worked with these educators and with the student interns to come up with games and exercises, things that would really engage folks in the classroom. They are actually doing signature matching like they would be at our office if they were working for us. They have an opportunity to actually model a referendum process in their school with something that they want to change. So it's stuff that really feels like it resonates in the classrooms. So that's a big part of what we've been doing for the past couple of years. Our focus has really been in South King County, which is where a lot of our work focuses. It's where you see lower registration rates, where you see lower turnout rates, and also these are classrooms where those students are facing more barriers to graduating as well. So that's really been our focus. In the first phase, our interns, with support from my staff, visited more than 85 classrooms. And ended up talking to about 1,700 high school seniors. So I think it was a really good first phase of the program where we felt like we reached a lot of folks. We are hopefully also getting those folks registered while we're there, but it's also just about education as well. We also, I think the one other thing I wanted to mention is some of these we do in Spanish also. I think we've learned also it's really important to meet folks where they are. So I'm lucky to have a member on my team who speaks each of the 6 languages that we provide ballots in. So they're out and about in those classrooms doing those presentations in language, which I think is really important when you're talking with students. So that's the first part. I wanted to talk a little bit more about civic interns as well, because they are critical to our success. They are not only out and about in the classroom, but they're also learning from our team. And they're valued members of our team. So they are getting to spend some time in a real work environment. They are getting to help support voter outreach events. I had the great opportunity to join one during this past election cycle at the Seattle Downtown Library branch, where it was mainly our interns who were setting up our accessible voting units and helping voters get to the voting spaces and doing the thing. It was very cool, and I think that they really kind of filled their cup to feel like they were having an impact on people making their voice heard. And we recruit them through a variety of different sources. They are paid, which we think is really important. They don't get credit, is what that means, but from what our understanding is from students and teachers, the getting paid and the college application piece is far more important than the credit hours. So that's something that they are doing, and they're working with us about 5 hours a week throughout the school year. So it's been really successful. We have learned, I think, more from them than they have learned from us. A big part of their role too is telling us what's going to work and what's not going to work. And wow, don't say that. That is not going to make any sense to anybody. So they've been really, really helpful. That's that piece. Another thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is our voter education fund program. I think the state does something a little bit similar to this, but since about 2017, we've partnered to provide grants to community-based organizations to do voter outreach and education. And one of our priority communities is always organizations that serve younger voters. So Para los Niños, Institute for Community Leadership. I don't know if you've worked with them before, but they are wonderful. They are doing, creating materials, booklets, things that are going to resonate with younger voters. The Vera Project is a longtime partner of ours. They focus on getting out to music events and festivals and connecting with young voters there. So really finding those places, those folks who know what they're doing, right? We want to put money in their hands so that they can make those connections in the spaces that young people are actually going to be. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about just work with colleges, because we do quite a bit of that as well. I know I heard a lot of noise for UW. I don't know if anyone's been to the Vote Center in the Student Union building. Anyone? Maybe. I see. Maybe. Were you there in 2024 in the presidential election? Because it was very busy. I think we saw 2 to 3 times more voters than we expected at that location. But one of the things we've done for a number of years now is to have a kind of student engagement hub, which is essentially a vote center in that student union building. And it's been really, really helpful just to have that presence and for students to know that, oh, you can still come on election day and do all the things that you need to do. UW also has what they call a Democracy Dogs Coalition, where they have staff and representatives from student government that meet on a monthly basis to talk about programming and pop-up efforts to get students involved in things. So we don't coordinate that, but we're very happy to be invited to participate. They do things like debate watch parties in the libraries that will provide fun swag for, or tabling in Red Square to direct students to the vote centers. They do really incredible work. And then similarly, we also have partnerships with Bellevue College, where we often have a vote center. We also do a lot of programming with them. I've got classes that come every single election to take a tour and bring their students in to see how the actual process works, which is really exciting. And then Kent Green River Campus, we have a vote center at as well, which has been great. Schools make really wonderful partners, and having that active presence on campus has been a really big deal for us. I think that's all I have to say. Those are the things I wanted to talk about, but I'm really keen to answer some questions and also to hear from all of you as well. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, panelists, for that. So, students, this is your time to ask a question. So I want you to think about your question, and then I'm gonna throw a question out to one of the panelists. Erin, I'm gonna throw you a question. Just give them time to think, right, of a question, and then when you think of it, I'm gonna turn to you. One of you gonna raise your hands. We're not gonna stare at each other because that happens a lot with this audience. And then I'm going to call on you. You stand up. You say your name, your college, university, because you're proud of that, and then your question. And start with you. Erin, so we have had so many different initiatives and programs and drives to motivate young people. In your studies, which one do you think are the more effective? Is it celebrities like Rock the Vogue doing personal appeals to young people? Is it the universities and colleges and schools? Is it the educational approach? Is it the political parties and campaigns? And so, what does your study say?
Yeah, I'd say some of the most important touch points.
Oh, if you can go on the mic because we're on TVW.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry.
Some of the most important touch points for young people definitely are ideally when young people are in school and have, public resources that they can access. This day that Washington State has to help seniors even, figure out the process of registering to vote while they're in a classroom setting with a teacher or somebody who can walk them through the process, I think is really important. But when it actually comes to the turnout, a lot of it comes down to the political campaigns and what the candidates are offering. I think what I've seen a lot in my research is that just young people tend to be very disillusioned with the political system. A lot of young people think that their vote doesn't even matter. I study young people's values, and one of the values that comes out is this idea of fatalism. Young people feeling more hopeless about the opportunities that they have in their lives and what the future is going to look like for them. And that kind of worldview plays out in the way that they approach voting and the political system. So when I think about what could be more helpful to turn out the youth vote is really just the candidates coming forward with better solutions for what young people are going through in their lives. I think there needs to be a really big conversation around social mobility in this country that we haven't really had. Is the higher education system working still? A lot of young people think that it's not worthwhile to even go to higher ed anymore, and it's what is that about? And if we aren't using education as that social ladder, where else are we going to find it? How are we going to build that into the other parts of our social system? So lots of work to be done for the candidates actually approaching the youth vote.
All right, so gave you some time to think about your question. I know some of you, I know you're going to ask me how many millions do we need to save, Steve? It's 15 million. So, and his program, all those people. So,
Thanks, boss.
So make sure you text that to your member. I'm going to go over here. Go ahead. Yes, that'd be you. Yeah.
I'm Michael. I'm from Eastern Washington University. Gigs? No one. Wow. So I guess my question would be, with people, younger people, increasingly getting their information from personalized algorithms like TikTok or Instagram, how is the voter outreach people adapting to that? Because we saw in the previous election, the presidential candidates went on different podcasts and broke into these different bubbles. Is the Secretary of State's office thinking about doing something similar?
Oh, this is at me. Wow. Okay. Well, thank goodness I have Steve here, who's part of the office. It's about. If you can answer, if you can't, I can answer it. But go ahead, Steve.
I'll give it a shot. So, as Erin kind of pointed out, a lot of what determines turnout is frankly what's on the menu. And that's kind of the way, frankly, a lot of younger voters do look at things is, I went into this restaurant, it has nothing I like, so I'm leaving. I kind of go back to the idea that it's completely valid to kind of feel at times at this particular juncture in our country that the system's not working. I would say that, a lot of young people have valid concerns about it. I was born in 1983, September 11th, out of my senior year. I lived through the recession, lived through 2 wars, lived through COVID, the pandemic, all the fallout. So it seems like it's a lot. I think I go back to the idea and my little saying there about democracy needs everybody on board and we need everybody kind of engaged. And while we cannot control necessarily the larger party structures at the national level, or you don't directly control necessarily who the candidates are, there's really 2 things I can offer, and I'll kick over to the secretary who will give a better answer than I can. But the first thing I can offer is, stay in the fight, please. Just stay in, because it's hard for you right now and you're dealing with a lot. But if you look at history, and not just American history, world history, let's say you're born in 1920. So depression hits when you're about 9 or 10 years old and your family loses the farm, your family loses everything. And then, sluggish recovery through the 30s, FDR's then, he's got all these public works projects, people are starting to get jobs, the public sector and whatnot. And then 1939 comes out of war in Europe. Well, hopefully that doesn't hit us. And then 2 years later, Pearl Harbor happens, and you're 21. Now, if you're a male, you're going to war, if you're able-bodied. If you're female, you're going to work because all the men are gone at that time frame. And then you get back, but how many people died in World War II? I mean, how many people died in the Holocaust? And the 50s are relatively stable from a certain perspective, but then I haven't even talked about, well, what if you're female? Or what if you're a person of color? Or what if you're differently abled? Or what if English isn't your first language and you immigrated? You're still dealing with all that. So I would say, your feelings are valid that things are rough, but I would challenge you just a little bit to think that, they've always been rough. And Americans have always risen to the occasion. And when I stick to this audience, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you already are rising to the occasion in a sense by being here in this room right now. The second part I would offer is none of the candidates on the menu are really what I want. Well, sir, ma'am, friend, sounds like you need to run for office. So let's talk. Third floor is yours.
So just so you know, we have expanded the way we've done outreach. So Kylie here is head of ISR. Again, if you want to save Kylie and her team, $15 million. The thing is that we are doing more. Mark cost money, right? It was a PR campaign that we did, and I am constantly pushed, and Mark is constantly pushed out to every type of social media platform, and I will speak at any event. Mark he doesn't really speak, but he will show up to whatever you need to do. We have to do that now because that's the way people receive their information, and we got to talk more than just getting you out to vote. We got to talk about the voting process, but we're not here to talk about the election process, misinformation. We're talking about young people voting. Does anyone else have a question over here? Yes.
Rhea Johnson, University of Washington, Tacoma. I'm a big fan and a big supporter of volunteering for the election cycle to actually see what it is. And so my question is, are there conversations about the misconceptions between registering to vote and serving in a jury, and how can we increase participation in both?
All right, does anyone want to take this? Maybe our county. I see you reaching for it, yes.
And that question went a different direction than I thought it was going.
Well, you know what you could do? Yeah,
I can give it a shot.
Make sure you mention about how they do, because I know friends that actually work at the county during election time too.
Yeah, a couple things I wanted to mention. We do pay all of our staff, right? So I think sometimes people say, hey, how can I volunteer and get involved? You can get paid to work for us, which is fantastic. One thing I also really like to mention, though, too, that I think is absolutely critical to trust in elections and combating that information that you're seeing online is observers. We don't get a lot of young observers, but we would love to see more. So every time we are processing, we have official observers from the King County Democratic Party, the King County Republican Party, and actually the League of Women voters coordinates nonpartisan observers. So it is an absolutely invaluable way for folks to, one, get involved, watch what's happening, and then report back to their community as trusted messengers. So we really love that. I think around getting registered to vote and doing jury duty, I will say I've never done jury duty and I'm dying to be called. So that's a little bit sad. Voter registration rates look really, really high in King County and in Washington State. So while we do really focus on those areas where we know we have lower rates, it's really micro-focusing because generally speaking, we've got really good registration rates. Jury duty, somebody might know better than I do. Jury duty really isn't pulled from the elections rolls, like I think most people think it is. It's from other sources. So I have less to offer on that front, but everyone should be doing jury duty too. It's really important.
All right, thank you very much. Does anyone have a question? Remember, there are no stupid questions, only stupid people. All right, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm from UW in Seattle. My question was on the civic education side, if there's any efforts to increase information about smaller primaries or off-year elections, because I remember back in 2023 I did carpooling for local municipal elections, and most people, if they didn't get the text from me, they wouldn't have even known an election was happening.
All right, let's take this.
So I'm really glad you asked that question because this is one of the things we're actually trying to get more involved with in my department. Then Lincoln, Stuart with elections, and Kylie as well. Kylie and I talk about Mark all the time, as the Secretary mentioned. Mark's kind of it's the big strategic message that goes out everywhere, and that kind of enables us to kind of start the conversation at the local level and hopefully drill a bit deeper into things like, say, off-year primaries, midterm elections, local elections, special elections. We just had a few special elections. I'm sure you know Stuart was all over that with his team. But honestly, I think you and I should talk, my friend, because we'd like to hear from you, kind of like what you did, and because we're trying to look at, once again, a lot of the best ideas that actually you were just talking about in terms of hearing what you're saying and hearing where you all are coming from, and not letting the old folks like me come and be like, well, this is what you need. It's like, well, no, I did this, and this is what we did well. This is what we could use more help on. Whether that's grant money, whether that's more people volunteering, whether that's a way to directly engage with any of our offices a bit more, or at the county level. A lot of our work is done through counties. Some counties are better able to do that, like King or Pierce. Some counties need a little bit more help just because they're just smaller counties overall. But honestly, we are trying to actually figure out how to best reach folks kind of where they're at and go back to what Kylie terms the hyper-focused, hyper-localized community engagement with each member, regardless of what county they're in, regardless of what municipality they're in order to get them involved. Because, there's a saying, all politics is local. So these little races matter a lot more than people think, whether that's for school board, city council, what have you. And honestly, we're looking at ways to better engage folks kind of at that level. More resources obviously do help, as the Secretary's kind of hammered away here. But in all seriousness, let's talk after this, because I'm interested in hearing your perspective on that.
I know Kendall was trying to grab the mic, so go ahead.
Sorry.
Not that aggressively. This, I think, speaks to an early question as well, but I think one thing we hear from our partners and from folks is that kind of work is more time intensive, right? It requires a deeper connection, and what really needs to be happening is having those nuanced conversations where you get to know what matters to someone and then connecting the dots to why that office that's up or why that ballot measure has an impact on it. And that's not easy work, right? That's not sitting at a registration table registering people to vote. It's a much deeper understanding. So I think we're just beginning to figure out how we do that. And I think people running for office makes a difference too, right? We've talked already about it, but having younger folks on the ballot makes a really big difference.
So, Erin and Steve, you brought up how candidates need to engage young people more, and and they do need to do that. But here's the cold facts, right? In terms of when we're talking at lower level races like legislature, city council. Anyone worked on a campaign? Raise your hand if you ever worked on a campaign. All right, not a lot. You want to get to know about politics for real? Those of you political science majors out there, work on a campaign, okay? Because I've knocked on tens of thousands of doors, literally, right? It's grueling, it's hard work, but you get to know what the people really want because they will let you know to your face, right? And here's the thing: when you're running for the legislature or city council, school board, resources are thin. Right? So what is a candidate going to do? They're going to target through mailers, digital ads, et cetera, et cetera. You know what they do? There's a voter database. We don't know who you voted for, but we know if you voted or not, right? Republicans have a voter database and Democrats have a voter database. And what will end up happening is, because you don't have enough resources, it's like, all right, I'm going to get what we call 4-4s, right? All people that voted for primary, general election in the even year. 4-4s. Those are good voters. I'm going to target them, all right? And if you look, as the age drops, as we see, we don't vote that much. And so what ends up happening is candidates go, you know what, I'm not sending this mailer out to people from 18 to 25 years old because why? I'm just burning a bunch of money because only 30% of them are going to vote. So if you want to matter, you got to vote because that's how candidates look at things. All right, question. Young lady over here, I can't tell. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm Alexis Weathers. I go to UW Seattle. So you shared earlier that one of the reasons that young people struggle to vote, get out to vote, is constantly moving, and that's something that I've experienced as a university student. I move every September, and then my ballot, my primary ballot's in the wrong place, my regular ballot's in the wrong place, everything's always in the wrong place. Are there avenues that you have pursued to try to address that issue? What, are there thoughts of a solution to that problem? Anyone?
Anybody on the panel?
Okay, I'll jump in with that. So that's a really good question, Alexis. It's actually something that it dovetails really neatly with one of my my teammates' lines of effort in terms of criminal justice. Because believe it or not, when it comes to not necessarily having a fixed address, folks who have recently been released from incarceration also have the same kind of issue. And we're trying to figure out best way to reach them as well as people who are more transient in their housing situation, whether that's for employment reasons, school reasons, and whatnot. I know with criminal justice, we tried one particular campaign. It was actually really quick timeline. With there was 6 weeks from when the secretary basically gave David, my specialist in criminal justice, a 6 weeks for him to basically put out a mailer to 27,000 recently released felons. And at the addresses that we had for them, and get them to register and to vote. And that did actually yield some pretty good results. There was about 27,000 letters. We got, I think, almost 1,500 or 1,700 actually registered, matching on their address. And we got about 1,000 people who actually voted. A little bit different with universities. The idea being, like, if you're like my parents, they would just tell me, hey, your ballot's here, you need to come get it. And I'd have to go get it because my address would be with them still as a student. But not every student's necessarily going to be like that. And do you remember to update? This is actually one of the things that Erin had talked about and Kendall and I had talked about in terms of like how do we reach these people where they are and our ballot isn't just kind of going into the ether because they're not necessarily there. Because at that point you're depending on the goodwill of parents or whoever else is at their current address or last address and not necessarily their current one. But one of the things we're trying to do is like maybe work with the Future Voter Program to be like, hey, if you're going to college or if you're moving, ensure they have the proper education to either update their address or, hey, just so you know, you're at 16, you're eligible for the Future Voter Program. You might be eligible to vote in the first primary when you're 17, depending on when the general falls on your birthday. Hey, just be aware that if you matriculate to a university and you're no longer living at home, you're going to have to update your address. And of course, it goes back to resources in terms of like how do we get, it costs money to send out mailers and update addresses and whatnot. But that is something we don't have a 100% solution for yet, as I'm sure you know. But something that we're looking at doing with Stuart and with Miriam, who handles our voter information services team, to make sure not only that you get the ballot, but you get the pamphlets and all the other cool stuff we can send you so that you're informed to make that decision. So something we are working on. I'm not sure, Kendall, if you have anything specific for King County, you could.
I could add just a couple of very specific things really quickly. One thing, if you happen to be in Seattle, I always like to ask, your landlord is supposed to be providing you with the voter registration form in your materials. So I'm always curious if that's actually happening. That was legislation that happened in Seattle a couple of years ago. And I think we also see universities doing really good work on this. I don't know, again, if it's happening at UW, but I know we had conversations around getting that kind of a box to pop up when you're doing registration to remind you to register or to update your registration. So I think it's little things here and there. We're also going to do everything we can to update your registration if we get that information, but it's tough. I've got a 22-year-old. He never does it. I do it for him. So I hear you.
Just to add on to that question, I feel as though the UI for the website on which you update your voter address can be frustrating at times, and I know that it 1 year took me an hour to update my address, and you'd think that that would be a more simple form. Is that something that's being worked on?
That's definitely good information to have. I do know that our folks at WATEC are always trying to make the interface user experience a little bit more friendly, especially to younger segments. That being said, I don't have anything offhand on what they're doing specifically update that page, but we should definitely make it.
Yeah, we're constantly trying to upgrade our, vowa.gov. That requires resources. So I couldn't tell who rose their hand over here at first. So I apologize if I didn't. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Alf. I'm a student from WSU Vancouver. Just had a bit of a quick observation. It seems like there's a lot of expectations for young people to be invested into the civic engagement on a conceptual basis. So like voting is important because democracy is good, but there seems to be kind of like an economic part of it that's being missing here. Most young people don't have careers, they don't have mortgages, they don't have families and children. And so these are the things that I find engage people to be in actually voting each and every time into primaries or general elections. For example, if you look at broader voting patterns between older adults, wealthier people vote at much higher rates than lower income people. And this is because those wealthier people have a much bigger interest in the status of the country and the outcomes of those elections. And so I find that if we're trying to reach young people, we have to kind of change the conversation about economically, why does this matter to you now as a student who might be thousands of dollars into debt just to get a higher education, just to be able to buy into that higher economic kind of status. And so I'm wondering how you guys.
Okay, that's definitely an Erin question, I believe. Yeah, so it's probably going to be our last question. It looks like, right? Okay, go.
Yeah, well, I want to mention a new reform that is being tested in different parts of the country, including Maryland and certain parts of California and the Bay Area, but it's actually to lower the voting age to 16 for local elections or school board elections. And that can be a really great way to engage young people while they're still living at home, in school, and engaged in what's happening in their school and their district, to get them more familiar with the voting process in general, and to show them how important their vote is. And so we're doing some research in the Bay Area right now on this reform movement. We're hoping it takes off more broadly, but I think young people need to have that more tangible experience with public policy that just show them, yes, your vote does matter. When you vote for X, school board member, this is the kind of return you might get. So it's just one idea to change kind of the socialization around voting for young people.
Well, thank you very much. All we have is smart people here with smart questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Secretary Hobbs for waiting for a question from WSU. It was a struggle, but we got there in the end. And once again, I'd like to thank our great panel for a great time. Thank you.